Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of The Journeymen, a podcast dedicated to the work of overlooked and underrated filmmakers. On each episode, we pick a director who we feel more or less fits that description, and we work our way chronologically through their entire filmography. My name is Bobby Lowe, and I'm here with my co-host,
Michael Pattison.
Please follow us on Twitter at _Journeymen, and subscribe to us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube. This episode was originally recorded as part of our previous podcast, The Habitus, and originally aired on the 16th of July, 2018. Here we are covering the first 5 films directed by Kathryn Bigelow, which are The Loveless from 1981, Near Dark from 1987, Blue Steel from 1990, Point Break from 1991, and Strange Days from 1995. And we will pick up at that point on our next episode and continue through the rest of her filmography. Okay, so first up we have The Loveless.
How'd you get that scar on your face?
The night my mama checked out. Killed herself. Daddy kinda lost his temper. He used to tell her, I'm gonna give you a smile from ear to ear. She just couldn't take it no more. So she did herself in. Bang, just like that. Shot herself in the head. Stuff was all over the wall. He gave me my car because he felt so guilty. And he's got this oil business.
What do you do when you're not having fun?
So The Loveless, 1981, 85 minutes, co-directed by Monty Montgomery, who is best known to both of us, I think, Bobby, as the dude who played the cowboy in Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
Stab being a smart aleck. He is apparently David Lynch's very good friend.
Oh, really? Yeah, because I noticed a lot of credits associated with. He was a producer on Wild at Heart, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He also produced Hotel Room, the HBO miniseries that Lynch directed parts of.
Yeah. And I think, if my research is correct here, that they met Bigelow and Montgomery at Columbia, and they wrote the script in 1980. Shot it in Hinesville, Georgia, outside of Savannah, on the US 17 motorway or highway, which I believe was its working title.
Yeah, that's right.
But then its first title wasn't The Loveless.
It's entered in most databases as The Loveless, but it premiered under the title Breakdown at the Locarno Film Festival in August of 81. But Bigelow didn't like that title because she felt it was too generic, and it was changed for, I say its release to The Loveless, but it was not really released. It played FilmX, the now defunct film festival in Los Angeles in 82. It also went to TIFF in 82, and according to IMDb, it wasn't released commercially in any capacity until it played in limited release in New York in March of 84, and beyond that, I don't know.
It was produced by A. Kitman Ho, who went on to produce, by the way, a lot of Oliver Stone's films: Platoon, Wall Street, Born on the 4th of July, The Doors, JFK, and all that jazz. Oliver Stone didn't make all that jazz.
No. I was going to
say. By the way, I think we should do a Journeyman episode on Oliver Stone, because he's very much a filmmaker who has massive gaps in his filmography that I haven't seen.
Yeah.
But anyway, the Wikipedia synopsis is comically thin for The Loveless. It's one line. It says, a motorcycle gang causes trouble in a small southern town. My synopsis is a motorcycle gang causes trouble in a small southern town.
Yeah, right. Well,
No,
that's
I mean,
actually, that kind of gets to sort of the first thing that I wanted to bring up about this. We'll come back to casting and everything. I just wanted to say that
Yeah.
on Letterboxd, imported from TMDB, where they get their data from, the log line, I'll call it a log line rather than a synopsis, was a small Midwestern town descends into chaos with the arrival of a motorcycle gang.
Yes.
Which is a little bit different.
Yes.
Than the one on IMDb.
Different
Now, which one would you say is more accurate?
I would say the first one, on the one I read out.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
so,
because the gang is, I think, traveling from Detroit to the Deep South, an unspecified town in the Deep South, where they're going to attend or participate in some kind of race.
It's the Daytona races.
Right.
Right.
Right, so it isn't unspecified, it is specified in the film. And the gang's focal point is Vance, played by then young New York theatre actor Willem Dafoe, who was subsequently cast in another leather-clad breakthrough, Walter Hill's Streets of Fire, on the strength of this film.
Sure.
And yeah, so the bikers are travelling between these geographies, and one of them breaks down, and so the gang has to stop at a very small town, and the film unfolds across a long, hot summer day. Mm-hmm. Tensions rise very, very gradually, mind you, between the visitors and the locals. Vance acquaints a local chick, played by Marin Cantin, the girlfriend of an abusive older fella. That's what I got from it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
And this being the 1950s, the locals fear and deride the bikers, of course, as commies. I mean, it's a film that promotes mood and atmosphere over plot and narrative suspense, let's say. And it very much feels like a debut feature in the best impressive artsy sense, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. It feels like a debut film, but it also the reason that I discovered all of Monty Montgomery's associations with David Lynch is because watching this I was struck by how completely different it is from anything Kathryn Bigelow did subsequently. Yeah. And I thought, okay, well, is this a Monty Montgomery film primarily? And I would say it probably is. I mean, because it does have a David Lynch kind of feel to it at times, I think.
Yeah, it's difficult to discern ultimately, but apparently both directors shared directing duties to the extent that they'd literally alternate days in the director's chair. So one day Bigelow would be directing with Montgomery as backup, and then the next day Montgomery would be directing with Bigelow as backup.
Okay.
And I mean, like, you could see, I think, traces of Bigelow, or what came to be known as Bigelow's kind of feel in the climactic kind of shootout or the violence that unfolds. Yeah. But in terms of its milieu and its sort of American iconography of hopper-esque empty gas stations and the lonely kind of rural roads and the real backwater feel and the sense of the fine line between innocence and menace that kind of permeates this milieu, I think you're right. It's very sort of, by association, I suppose, Lynchian.
Yeah. Well, it has that kind of it has that 80s 50s nostalgia kind of feel that like Blue Velvet has, and also the incest angle,
right? Yeah.
The artificiality of the dialogue, the posing, the weird pauses in between, like no one has a normal conversation. Everything has this weird beat of silence before the response, which is a Lynchian kind of thing too. The use of music, it's kind of wall to wall 50s tunes.
Yeah, a lot of the rockabilly music's contributed by Robert Gordon, who actually plays Davis in the film. Mm-hmm. So you've got obvious references here. I mean, you've mentioned in 80s nostalgia 50s, so you've got the Wild One, I think, is a key reference point here.
Yeah.
But it's actually it's not I mean, it's a very sort of basic film in its construction. but I don't think it's necessarily simply or simplistic in its nostalgia or its nostalgic framework. I think it says more about films in 1980s America or Hollywood than it does about 1950s America.
No, I mean, it's not a rosy portrait at all. It's
Yeah.
it's not a. Sorry, when I said nostalgia, I meant in the distinct Lynchian sense. It's not like,
Yeah, I get you.
Idealizing the 50s at all. Well, let's not beat around the bush. Did you like this?
I did ultimately, yeah. When I said it feels like a debut feature in the best sense. In a couple of episodes ago, in fact, it was last episode now that we missed one. We were talking about Shrew's Nest feeling very much like a debut feature in a more sort of problematic sense, in that it tried to overdo everything and try to fit 3 different concepts and films into one. Whereas I think this feels very stretched out, and the pictorial strengths of it keep me watching, and this, the feel and tone of it. I love, if let's continue just to credit the sort of directing to Bigelow, for simple reasons, but it has a sort of lethargic place study feel to it. That actually very much reminded me of James Benning's Landscape Suicide, which comes a few years later, but feels again very much rooted in sort of New Yorkian 1980s filmmaking, where place was promoted and landscape was promoted as a key component in the drama, and drama itself, let's say, was sort of demoted in terms of narrative interest. What about you? Did you like it?
Ultimately, not particularly.
Okay.
But when I read the Letterboxd logline, a small Midwestern town descends into chaos with the arrival of a motorcycle gang, and I saw 82 minutes. I thought, okay, great.
Yeah.
And then when the film started, it started with such an assured sense of style and personality and like dark humor. The opening scene is Willem Dafoe on his own because the rest of his gang have broken down, or rather one of them has broken down and the others are helping him or whatever. And so he's on his own. And we're getting this narration where he's talking about what does he say about the endless blacktop?
Yeah, he's saying I was going hell in a breadbasket.
Yeah.
Yeah, the endless blacktop. And
he rides past a woman who is broken down at the side of the road. He circles back around and he comes back, and he, in a very sort of like overbearing, intimidating way, he without asking if she needs help or if she wants him to help, he just proceeds to jack up her car and change her tire, and then demands money from her for it, and she pays him, and then he robs and sexually assaults her and drives off. Right, so I was like, okay, this looks really, really good. With that in mind, that a small Midwestern town descends into chaos. And then that doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't. That's just wrong. I've since changed the logline on Letterboxd to more accurately reflect that. But it's the style that I liked at the beginning, it starts to feel very monotone, and the extremely mannered performances start to become a little bit alienating, and the whole midsection of the film feels kind of hollow. It feels like this hollow, like the characters are almost like in the compositions almost posing for the camera.
Yeah, it's like it's sort of past action, like tripod fixed compositions.
Yeah.
People sort of staring off screen, and then we're never really given the reaction shot. And when we are, as you mentioned just now, it is delayed, like the cut to whatever the person's looking at. It's sort of a style that isn't sustained by its plot, if you know what I mean.
Well, it doesn't. See, the thing is, like, I didn't necessarily want plot. I was more interested in the characters and the, like you mentioned, the young woman who Vance meets. And and who we heard in the clip. You know, that she's the daughter of this guy who has an oil business and who has also been like repeatedly sexually assaulting or raping her or something like that. There's this like incest, very kind of, you know, gestured at sort of incest storyline. And you mentioned that the film feels thin, but it doesn't feel thin because there's nothing there. It feels thin because it seems to be more interested in these mannered sort of presentations of the biker gang. None of whom are really differentiated very well in terms of their personalities.
No.
And it just I don't know, like halfway through I kind of went, this isn't that interesting. You know, it's worn out its welcome with me. They're not doing enough with the elements that they have here.
Yeah, it's like it simultaneously unfolds, I think, without like a defined causality, and yet each sequence has like parallel editing that suggests or tries to invoke some kind of tension by suggesting some narrative connection between, like, you know, scenes, like for instance, like the striptease, which is unfolding at the same time as two characters having sex elsewhere, and by merely cutting between these two spaces is where it's, you know, Bigelow and Montgomery are suggesting some kind of connection with them, like they're gonna collide or whatever. Never quite does, and so the whole film sort of unfolds in that manner. And it's as if like, oh, okay, so what do we do now? Well, what else might be happening in this town? So we'll cut to that. It feels very much like a short film for me that has just been completely outstretched to 80 odd minutes. Nevertheless, I did ultimately like it with qualifications.
The other plot that's introduced later, you mentioned it, is the oil man. So essentially the plot, if there's a plot here, is that the biker gang arrives in town. The leader of the gang, Vance, meets this young woman who turns out to be the daughter of the oil man. The oil man is irate about these, what he calls these commies coming into town, and he bursts into the motel where Vance and the other character, his name is Telena, have just had sex, and he drags her out of there. He threatens Vance, and then we get these scenes where he's trying to convince his friend to murder the bikers, to ambush them on the road and shoot them. And you know, I mean, that's a plot, you know, but it's just so it's that those elements are so pared down, and those conflicts are so, like, the conflict between Vance and the oil man is just not there at all. You know, it's just not there, and that's kind of more what I was looking for. More interesting interaction between the biker gang and between the, like, we get a scene where the owner of the diner says that she hates these bikers, and I don't know, it's just ultimately it didn't deliver on its early promise for me. And I kind of, with like 20 minutes left to go, I was kind of going, okay, come on.
Yeah. So what would you give it out of 10 then?
I'd give it a 5.
Oh, 5. Well, I'm going to go for 6.
Okay.
And you know, I didn't really know anything about this film other than the fact that it was Bigelow's first feature, other than the fact that Willem Dafoe was in it very, very early in his career. And it's quite telling, actually, that that's the only two things that I know about it, because it's the only two things that are kind of notable. But, you know, now, as I said, you know, I think the way in which that kind of iconography is framed can go a long way for me. Maybe if this film was 95 minutes rather than 82 or 85. I have it down as 85, but you said it was 82.
It just says 82 here on
okay.
Letterboxd.
Then, you know, maybe I would have got bored too, but I think...
Or if it was the 95 minutes, maybe they would have filled out those extra 10 or 15 minutes with something that would have made it feel more substantial.
Yeah, with incident.
You know, but if it was another 10 minutes of them posing for the camera in the garage, then probably not. But yeah. So will we move on to the next one?
Absolutely.
Okay, so her solo directorial debut, 1987's Near Dark.
Ah!
Caleb, look, Caleb. I want to go home too.
Yeah, I called, May. Ain't nobody home. Nobody was home. Jesus, this is fucked, May. I'm scared.
So was I, but don't be. Just feel it. Feel what's in you.
That's what scares me. I feel it.
You're in my hands.
What do we do now?
Anything we want. To the end of time. But you have to learn to kill.
Okay, so Bigelow's second film, 1987's Near Dark, produced by Stephen Charles Jaffe and written by Bigelow with Eric Red, who she'd go on to collaborate with on a few other projects. Produced for FM Entertainment and distributed by De Laurentiis Entertainment Group. Premiered at TIFF in September of 1987. It was released in North America in October of 1987 and in the UK in January of 1988. It had a production budget of $5 million and only grossed $3.4 million domestically. Okay, so brief synopsis. Cowboy Caleb Cotton, played by Adrian Pastar, meets a gorgeous young drifter named May, played by Jenny Wright, at a bar, and the two have an immediate attraction. But when May turns out to be a vampire and bites Caleb on the neck, their relationship gets complicated. Racked with a craving for human blood, Caleb is forced to leave his family and ride with May and her gang of vampires, including the evil Severin, played by Bill Paxton. Along the way, Caleb must decide between his new love of May and the love of his family. Okay, so we actually discussed Near Dark already on episode 4 last October, our Halloween episode. So, rather than repeat ourselves, I've created a shorter edit of our conversation from that episode, which originally ran 22 minutes, and I've cut it down to just under 16 minutes. I've removed a lot of digressions and general Bigelow discussion. So if you want to listen to the full thing, you can go back to episode 4 and listen to that. And if you've already listened to that, then you've heard everything for the next 16 minutes, so you can skip ahead exactly 16 minutes. I will add some further thoughts at the end.
Yeah, so Near Dark, very, very good. It has two great star turns by Adrian Pastar as Caleb Cotton, a cowboy who is converted into a vampire by May, played by Jenny Wright. Two actors who aren't well-known figures. The two kind of people by which this film is more well-known are Bill Paxton, sadly no longer with us, and Lance Henriksen, who is famous from Aliens, his turn in Aliens. And he plays Jesse here, the head vampire of the clan that sort of convert Caleb into a vampire. Convert's the wrong word. What word should I be using? What's the technical term?
Turn.
Turned. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I like this film a great deal. It has a real energy to it, largely from its soundtrack. Tangerine Dreams, beautiful soundtrack.
Right.
And it unfolds kind of almost as if it isn't a horror film. That's the strange and wonderful thing about this. So it's a vampire film, but it unfolds like many different things, like a romance, kind of a laid back noir in places as well.
Right, so a noir, but the original impulse on Kathryn Bigelow's part was to make a western.
Yeah,
and she was told that westerns are out of fashion.
Yeah,
you should try to fuse that with a different, more popular genre.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And vampire films, particularly contemporary set vampire films, had started to come back with Fright Night, which had been a big hit.
And 1987 also saw the release of The Lost Boys by coincidence.
Yeah, which kind of sank Near Dark, because Near Dark came out a couple months after The Lost Boys, and The Lost Boys was a studio film with a huge marketing budget behind it. And it was Near Dark was an independent film that was completely overshadowed by it. Funnily enough, there was talk of Michael Bay's Platinum Dunes doing a remake of Near Dark. You know, the way they did a lot of the 70s and 80s remakes in the 2000s. But the remake was torpedoed by the release of Twilight.
Oh, okay.
Twilight was too close to what they were planning on doing with Near Dark. So, and actually in the short documentary, it's not a making of documentary. It was like produced for DVD in the early 2000s. It's called Living in Darkness. They did talk about they had an idea for a prequel that would be set during the Civil War and show Jesse, Lance Henriksen's character, kind of how he was turned,
fighting for the South.
You know.
We lost.
Yeah, apparently Lance Henriksen came up with an idea that he was in the Confederate Navy, and that they were in a naval battle on the Chesapeake. There were men were dying, and harpies, like these spirits, were feeding on the dying men, and he was shot and dying, and a harpy hovered over him and took pity on him, and instead of killing him, turned him into a vampire. That was his own backstory for his character. And I don't know whether that would have been incorporated into this early film, which was possibly going to be called First Light.
Right.
But obviously that's not going to happen.
I mean, you mentioned it as a hybrid horror. Like, I think going into this film, not knowing anything else about it other than who directed it and who was in it, like, you know, it's kind of sold or advertised as a Western horror. For me, you know, I can kind of see that. I mean, you know, Caleb's a cowboy, but it's a contemporary Western, even if it is, you know, it's not like a period
neo-Western. Yeah,
it's not a period production in that way. Yeah, I mean, it's
which I suppose the prequel would be a period.
Yeah.
Western horror.
Yeah. Oh, that would be the hope anyway. Yeah, I mean, there's that's kind of the appeal and attraction of vampires. You know, they live for centuries, so like they lend themselves to those kinds of prequels and sequels and whatever else that, you know, span multiple eras.
Yeah, I really like the movie. This is an example of taking supernatural, kind of strange, mystical, otherworldly concepts and stripping all of that away, and creating. Obviously, this film is not science fiction, but they kind of medicalize vampirism.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference between the classic vampire and the modern vampire is primarily that with the modern vampire, it's you're the same person after you're turned. You're the same person that you were before.
Yeah.
Except you now have this insatiable thirst for blood, and that introduces this moral dilemma to the characters, like in Interview with the Vampire or something like that, where they have to drink human blood, but then they have to reckon with the moral quandary of, you know, whether they can kill or should kill. Whereas in you know, stories like Dracula, these are kind of like, say, when Dracula kills Lucy, and then Lucy comes back. She's not Lucy anymore. She just looks like Lucy. She has Lucy's memories, and she can tap into Lucy's personality and everything like that to manipulate the living. But it's not that Lucy's dead body is possessed by a pre-existing spirit of some kind, but she is now this kind of like evil spirit.
I get it. Yeah.
Which is not the case in Near Dark or The Lost Boys or something like Blade. You know,
and so
which is more the sympathetic vampire.
Are you expressing a preference here for the type of film that Near Dark is, the kind of take or reading of that traditional genre?
No.
Okay.
A preference for the classical Gothic vampire.
Okay.
I think is more that kind of I don't know. It speaks to me more, but I don't mind it. I just it's
I mean, Caleb's sort of unturned here, isn't he? He's by his father, who gives him a blood transfusion, and he's no longer a vampire.
That's what I mean in the medicalization of vampirism, where they can be kind of, it's like almost like infected blood that you can take out of you, and then suddenly you're no longer, you know, the sunlight no longer kills you. I actually really like the ending, though. I love that he turns her back as well. My favorite moment in the movie, actually, we're going to talk about the central scene in the bar, which is fantastic.
A licking good time.
But finger licking good. The scene, there's a shot where the vampire family insists that Caleb kill someone, because they're not going to carry him. He has to kill on his own. So May brings Caleb. They hitchhike with a trucker, and it's a great scene where Caleb is like, sort of crouching up in the seat, and he's kind of like moving closer and closer to the trucker, and the trucker is kind of just like talking kind of affably to him, kind of getting a little bit weirded out by his posture and his expression, and eventually he just gets out of the cab and he throws up and he can't do it, and May ends up doing it instead. But there's a scene where it cuts to May cutting her wrist and giving it to Caleb to drink, and they're shot against these pump jacks, and like all this steam in the background, and like the Tangerine Dream score. So it's like Caleb is sucking the blood out of May's body while the pump jacks are sucking the oil out of the ground. It's just absolutely beautiful. And that's probably my favorite single image in the movie. But the central and really the highlight of the movie, the central scene is when the family kills all of the patrons of the bar, and toys with them cruelly and like in different ways.
Really
even
merciless,
like Bill Paxton's character Severn, his he's like antagonizing the patrons and trying to get them to fight with him, and cracking all these jokes and everything and having a great time. Whereas May is kind of like seducing them, and it's just a fantastic scene. And then there's the final shot after everything has just descended into like bloody mayhem is the young kid, Homer, just dancing on the bar. It's absolutely fantastic. Oh, it's so great. And they're trying to get Caleb to kill someone in the bar.
And again, another lean production. It's like 95 minutes. It's it feels kind of
it's actually under
how to sort of express that. It feels lean even while you're watching it, like, and I like to be in the presence and the grip of a film like that.
It feels pared down.
And I love films that are doing one thing in the style of another. So like we've mentioned it, like this kind of noir-esque feel to it and vibe that comes from its soundtrack. Like it just got a real beautiful evocation of place as well. Yeah.
It's only kind of a vampire film, kind of. So it's a western about a roving family of serial killers.
Yeah.
Effectively.
Yeah.
And they happen to be vampires.
Yeah.
Because you could more or less remove the vampirism from it to a certain extent. It's similar to like Rob Zombie's Devil's Rejects or something like that, where it's like a family that's like, just almost like a like serial killer Bonnie and Clyde kind of thing. I would say if I was to criticize it, I would say that I think we could have had more time with the vampires in the second act. That we could have had maybe one more set piece along the lines of the bar.
Yeah.
And we could have had more sort of quiet moments of dialogue between between say Jesse and Diamondback, played by Jeanette Goldstein, or like talking more about their past, or between Homer and May, or someone like that, because Homer's actually quite an interesting character because he was turned as a child, so he's an adult on the inside and he's a child on the outside forever. You could have had a little bit more of that, I think. Because I think if, like, what is it about? Because Caleb kind of drives a wedge into the vampire family, his presence. He kind of divides them in his relationship with May, and he kind of, what do you think it is about Caleb that drives Jesse? Because Jesse has lived for 150 years or something like that, and suddenly his behavior toward the end of the film, primarily in relation to May, who has only been a vampire for, I think she says 4 years. So he's only known her for 4 years, and he's been alive for 150 years, and yet Caleb's relationship with May and the wedge that drives into the family sort of drives Jesse to what feels like sort of self-destructive behavior.
Yeah, you'd think
in the film's final moments.
You would assume that having been around so long, that's kind of happened previously, or you would have experience of that kind of divisive character being ingratiated into that group, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know what I make of it. I wasn't sure. While I was watching it, it wasn't something that I felt compelled to sort of have a position on or whatever. It didn't really leap out at me as some sort of like contrivance or plot gap.
No, I think it kind of makes sense on it. It flows as a kind of on the basis of its themes. It kind of works thematically, but
and again, it works, as you say, to come back to the idea of this film being exactly the same with the vampirism kind of taken out. It would also work in that regard, like the kind of head of a clan or family like this being innately suspicious of a newcomer, and having to kind of warm to him through enforcing certain rituals upon him that everyone has to go through in order to be kind of trusted.
Also, how do you feel about the pull? Like, so while Caleb is on the road with the vampire family, his human family, his father and his much younger sister, are trying to find him because they saw him being kind of abducted by the vampires, and they eventually find him, and you're sort of prompted to feel that he is pulled between the allure of the vampire life and his former life. Do you feel that? Do you feel the pull between the two lives? Or what do you feel the appeal? I mean, he finds a solution in that he just, like, the pull of the vampire life is May.
Yeah, sure.
Nothing else. And he doesn't enjoy the lifestyle of it.
Yeah.
He finds a solution to that in the blood transfusion.
Yeah, I agree that we're meant to feel that that's a part of the plot, but to answer your question specifically, I don't really feel that either the performance or the way the character's written sort of encapsulates that pull, or the film sort of de-emphasizes it in some way, whether counterintuitively or deliberately, I don't know. But I do like the fact that...
I think it comes back to the... Yes,
I do like the fact that there are two families at play. And I like the chemistry that, with his sister, who he's very protective over, and that scene where Homer is wanting to, turn her into a vampire also. I mean, the interplay of, because you can see how both would be appealing to him. Eventually, he's going to, if he wasn't turned back, he fully embraced the lifestyle that comes with being a vampire, one would assume.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I like the way it's positioned.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think it sort of comes back to the feeling that the second act is a little bit underwritten in terms of its characters, in terms of its characterization, and Okay, so do you have anything to add to that?
Well, what's interesting listening to that, having now viewed the rest of Bigelow's work, at that time I hadn't seen the majority of her films, is how this film's premise, Dark's premise, anticipates Point Break's, regarding what you said about Caleb feeling torn between two families, but which we'll come to in regard to Point Break in due course and in more detail. But also the thing that I seemed most responsive to near Dark is what I call the film's energy, but what I really mean is probably its tone, and its sort of laid back vibe, which I think is also what drew me to the Loveless. Though obviously here Bigelow has a proper script to work with in addition to the evocation of place.
Sure.
And what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I more or less said everything that I have to say about it on that. Because I had seen it before. Seeing it for last year's Halloween episode. But
did we rate it on that episode? I think we did, didn't we?
No,
we didn't. We weren't giving out scores at that point.
I don't think so. So let's. What would you give Near Dark?
Well, I think I think at the time, although we didn't rate it on the episode itself, I gave it an 8 in my personal private scores, and I'm probably going to stick with that for now.
Okay, but didn't you also choose it as one of the 10 best films that you saw for one of your 10 discoveries of last year at the end of the year?
Did I? Yeah, that's probably true.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's still only an 8 though.
Yeah, that's still only an 8.
Okay.
Though in all honesty, I remember this film, obviously, probably the least of all the films now, because I've watched or rewatched 8 of a other 9 in the past 4 or 5 days. So it feels like a generous 8, but it also feels like a rewatch would very much confirm that.
You're stingy with your 9s, aren't you?
I am stingy with my 9s. What is it for you? A 9?
It's a 9 for me.
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
that's a big leap then from the Loveless to the Near Dark. This feels like a proper.
Yeah, I mean, she dropped the dead weight of Monty Montgomery.
Yeah.
Picked up Eric Red. Okay, will we move on?
Yes, let's move on to Blue Steel.
This poor guy bought it on the Upper West Side tonight. If it wasn't so bold, it would be stupid. Wish all homicides were this easy. Give me an answer to this.
I have no idea.
Get an idea.
Get 2 ideas.
Think, Megan.
Hard.
Aren't there any other Megan Turners in New York?
Yeah, one. Megan Augusta Turner, 86 years old, lives in a nursing home in the Bronx. We're checking, but I'd say it's an exercise. Doesn't sound like the kind of girl that gets her name put on a bullet.
I don't think of myself as the kind of girl who gets her name on a bullet either.
Learn something new about yourself every day. Where were you around midnight?
Sleep.
The officers woke her up, Nick.
Okay. Come on, Megan. You're a pretty girl. Maybe you threw over somebody, had a violent streak, an old boyfriend or something. What, no old boyfriends? Had a personal problem? All right, how about an acquaintance?
Look, I don't know anybody. My mom, my dad, my friend Tracy, her husband John. I mean...
Current boyfriend?
No. You know, there's a chance it's not me.
True. Could be Augusta, 86. I mean, maybe this perpy's got a thing for oxygen tanks, but I doubt it. I think somebody out there likes you.
Okay, so Blue Steel was co-written with by Bigelow with Near Dark's writer Eric Red, produced by Edward Pressman, our future journeyman focus Oliver Stone, and Lawrence Kasanoff, and distributed in the end eventually by MGM following some problems with its original distributor. Premiered at Sundance in January 1990 and was released theatrically a couple of months later, is my understanding. It's a police thriller in which Jamie Lee Curtis plays Megan Turner, a New York Police Department recruit who shoots and kills an armed robber one night in a supermarket. The robber played by Tom Sizemore in the first of 3 consecutive appearances in Bigelow films. Among the many shoppers and witnesses inside the supermarket is Eugene Hunt, played by Ron Silver, a Wall Street trader who, unbeknownst to Megan, picks up the robber's gun and walks away from the scene, only to carve, as we heard in the clip just now, Megan Turner into a bullet and kill an innocent bloke a few nights later. Megan is firstly suspected as the killer by the NYPD, and obviously Eugene doesn't leave the gun itself at the murder scene. Suspended, Megan meets and begins a romance with Eugene, not knowing he is in fact the killer, though it isn't long before she does realise this, and significantly, when she does, nobody believes her due to a lack of evidence, and I suppose, which we'll come to, concomitant prejudices against women. Because watching this movie, Bobby, I was actually reminded a lot of the Sidney Lurie film, The Entity, perhaps also because Ron Silver's in that film in a much more sympathetic role. But I think two films ultimately about, in metaphorical terms, the difficulties of women coming forward and being believed about traumatic contexts and the systems that kind of denigrate and marginalize them and alienate them. I hadn't seen this before prior to this episode. You had?
I had, yeah. Once, a long time ago.
Okay.
What did you think of it?
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, it's daft and it's very, very silly. I mean, like, you know, as we heard in the clip, like it's obvious that they should be like, you know, suspecting this guy who's new, this brand new presence in Megan's life, and they never do. But again, there's a metaphor for the ways in which women aren't taken seriously. I think it works.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the fact that he's like a wealthy, respectable,
Yeah.
you know, I would like probably an overstatement to say pillar of the community, but he's wealthy and he's respectable, and he hires an expensive lawyer played by Richard Jenkins, who starts to, you know, threaten to, you know, have people like have people's careers basically if they don't like stop harassing him, leave him alone. And there is no material evidence. You know, so there's a scene late on when Megan already knows that Eugene is the killer, where Eugene ambushes Megan and her friend Tracy, who she mentioned in the clip. As they're leaving their apartment, he comes up behind Megan. Tracy's walking ahead of her and doesn't see him. He takes Megan, kind of puts her in a headlock and shoots Tracy as she's walking out of the building, and then pistol whips Megan and knocks her unconscious. And we see this, and we see Eugene clearly. And then afterwards, when the lawyer is like Megan and her partner Nick show up at Eugene's house, and they're accusing him of doing this, and the lawyer turns up. First of all, demands a warrant from Nick. You know, like really kind of shuts them down, and then asks Megan, like, did you see his face? And then we realize, as she realizes, that no, she didn't see his face.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's all those little things. So I would say that the underlying premise is very outlandish, and it's been described, I think even maybe by Eric Red, the co-screenwriter, as a werewolf film, where you know, Eugene is, and Nicholas Winding Refn actually described Drive as a werewolf film as well, where you've got this character who doesn't literally transform into a werewolf, but it's the same thing, right? It's the same kind of, he's a mild-mannered, normal, nice guy, and then suddenly he becomes a monster. And that's the root of werewolf folklore, is in, or this is one theory at least, that it's rooted in the discovery of like victims of medieval serial killers. And the idea that like no human being could do this to another person. It must have been some kind of monster. So, you know, he does present this facade of like respectability and everything, and that's the kind of the high concept underlying premise. But I think in terms of everything that Richard Jenkins brings up in the course of it, I can see them, you know, disregarding what Megan is saying, because it does sound ridiculous. You know, there's these motiveless killings, no material evidence, and it's just this guy who now there's this whole like jilted lover kind of angle to it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's also a reflection of, you know, a legal system that's weighted against victims in a way as well.
Sure.
But there's three institutions here. So we've mentioned the police. We've mentioned the fact that Eugene is in Wall Street.
Yeah.
But there's also family. So we have Megan's parents.
Yeah, in a B-plot.
Yeah, and which I suppose informs her characterization heavily, is the fact that her mother and father still live together. Her father's very, very antagonistic towards the idea of her becoming a cop.
Yeah.
But is also abusive. He has a history of abuse towards the mother.
Towards his wife. Yeah.
Towards his wife, Megan's mother. And I mean that sort of, I think, gels very nicely with the you know, the wider mechanisms of the narrative of the plot.
Sure, it's a small but important B plot that sort of points to and emphasizes the film's allegorical undertones.
Yeah.
I really like the scene where she arrests her dad is so satisfying. It's so great. I really, really like this movie. When I rewatched it this time, the first half of the film is so good. I was thinking, why? Because the rating that I had entered was 7. And I was like, why did I enter this as like a 9? This is amazing. And then the same issues that I presumably had with it the first time kind of emerge in the second half. And I don't remember really pinning them down last time, but I think I did this time. And I think it's that Eugene becomes more of a sort of an ordinary baddie in the second half.
Well, it's
And
never
his-
really established, is it? What, like, his actual, like, is he traumatized by the?
Well, he hears
the real
voices.
Supermarket, like, yeah.
No,
so,
no. I don't think so at all. I think there's something. I think he's like if we take the werewolf analogy, there's something like he is like some kind of split personality. I think he's the film. He reminds me of like a Patrick Bateman kind of like American Psycho type of character who's like perfectly respectable but actually like completely insane.
But do you think my point is though? Do you think the scene in the supermarket triggers something dormant in him? That's subsequent. I mean, because we're not really given any history in his character, we don't know if that's pre-existing.
Oh, do you think like so?
Before?
Oh, okay, no. I don't think he's killed anyone before. No.
Yeah, but he feels connected, right, to Megan.
Yeah.
And the power and uniform and authority that she expresses.
Right, exactly. So he's drawn to her, and initially, like when he first pursues her, which he does, it's very much him, and she's resistant to it. Yeah. And they end up dating. He's not doing that for the reasons that, you know, he doesn't want to hurt her at that point. He sees her as a kindred spirit. Yes. And when he ultimately turns on her, or when rather she turns on him, when he reveals the truth about himself to her, he does it with the kind of naive, delusional expectation that she is actually going to join him in this you know, sort of spiritually driven, you know, killing spree. Mm-hmm. And obviously, like she immediately calls the police and everything. But from that point on, I think the characterization of his character becomes a little bit wobbly, and it's like they've set up these kind of more unusual concepts in the beginning of the film, and they fall by the wayside as the film goes on, and he becomes more of just a direct antagonist to her. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Is part of that disappointment informed by how great Ron Silver is at playing like more ambivalent and more ambiguous characters?
Yeah, in general.
Yeah, I mean, he's absolutely amazing in The Entity. As I said, it's a much more sympathetic role.
I haven't seen The Entity
character.
in so long.
But ultimately, he does have a skepticism towards the female protagonist in that film, Barbara Hershey. Even despite his, you know, romantic wish to kind of protect her from what she's suffering from. And I think he does that really well here as well, although he's obviously more villainous, if you like. But yeah, I agree. Something turns, and I think it's like, I was wondering, okay, at what point is this film going to be about her trying to find out who the killer is?
Yeah.
And she finds out much earlier than I was expecting it.
Yeah, about halfway through.
Yeah. And so what happens after that is her trying to prove or gather evidence of the fact.
Ultimately initially trying to prove it, but then ultimately kind of just giving up on that and just trying to end it in the best, sort of least incriminating way that she can. So he has his gun buried beside a tree in Central Park, and she follows him, and he finds him like scrabbling in the dirt, like digging around, and you know, infers that he must have hidden his gun here somewhere. So she comes up to him and she unbuckles her holster and, you know, goads him and prompts him to go for her gun, you know, trying to get him to do something that will allow her to legally kill him. Yeah. That's kind of where it goes then. That's where it goes after he kills her best friend, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's that really charged, menacing scene where he invites himself to her parents' home.
Yeah.
And she arrives there, and he's there. And again, it's that thing of the ways in which these institutions and the institutional fabric, I suppose, of American life is weighted against the wishes and words of a woman. You know, because she's under so many different social pressures to find a guy, you know, to settle down with somebody romantically. I mean, you get that scene early on in the barbecue when her friends introduce her to some fella who then subsequently like freaks out when she reveals that she's a cop.
Isn't it funny though that like, is that his reaction and also the father's antipathy toward police? Like, it's not like the father's like in the mob or something like that. He's just seems to be just like a kind of a standard guy, you know. So it's weird how that's just taken as sort of given that, you know, people just in general detest the police.
Yeah,
which I don't think is true.
Well, all coppers are bastards, still, aren't they?
Well, that's true. If what's written on the walls is to be believed. But these are not, like, I don't know, the guy at the barbecue and her dad just, like, outwardly don't appear to be the type of people who would have some sort of, like, fixed prejudice against the police, you know?
Yeah.
But that's, maybe on the part of the guy at the barbecue, it's more of a sexist thing.
Yeah.
Because he laughs at her when she says she's a cop and then realizes, oh, she's actually not joking. And then she takes the piss out of him by kind of pressuring him about, like, his taillight being out and his insurance and all this sort of stuff.
And then she tells him to lighten up.
Yeah.
But might we read in this film like a kind of a reflexive thread of, like, you know, Megan having to embody a kind of ruthless masculinity in order to beat or fit in with the system in a way that, you know, Bigelow is known as, you know, the woman director who makes action films, like constructed around violence and everything else. Because it's a film very much about power dynamics in social and institutional ways, I think.
Yeah. Although Bigelow was quoted, I think the following year, in like 1991, as saying that she doesn't really feel that she never thinks about that. She never thinks about the fact that she's a woman director or that there are institutional barriers in her way or whatever.
Yeah.
So like what I was saying was that in the second half, the really interesting, unique, and kind of like horror inflected characterization of Eugene's character. I mean, there's a scene where he murders a prostitute and then rubs her blood drenched cardigan or whatever all over his body. On the rooftop in New York, all the glittering lights and the skyscrapers and stuff, and that kind of unfortunately falls to the wayside, and it becomes more of like a cat and mouse game between, you know, like a psycho killer and but it's all done really well, you know. So no, I like it a lot.
Would you give it an 8?
I'm gonna give it an 8. Yeah.
Oof. I'm gonna say 7.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We move on to her next film.
Yes, indeed. Let's move on to Point Break.
You act like nothing happened.
Relax, Nathaniel.
Don't tell me to relax, Bodie! He's a fucking federal agent! Should have shot him when I had the chance.
I'll deal with that fucking cop. No, Rosie. Do you realize that we have hit 30 banks in 3 years and they haven't been able to touch us? And all this does is up the stakes of the game.
Fuck the stakes, Bodie! I mean, the only person this is a game to is you, man. This is real. I mean, this is serious shit, and I am scared, okay? So I say we get the fuck out of here now, tonight, okay?
You run, you die. Come on, think about it. This was never about money for us. It was about us against the system. That system that kills the human spirit. We stand for something. To those dead souls inching along the freeways in their metal coffins, we show them that the human spirit is still alive. So you trust me? Okay. Then don't worry about this guy. I know exactly what to do with him.
Okay, so Point Break, written by W. Peter Iliff, with uncredited contributions from James Cameron, from a story by Rick King and Iliff, produced by Peter Abrams and Robert L. Levy, for Largo Entertainment and Levy Abrams Guerin Productions, distributed by 20th Century Fox, released in North America in July of 91, in the UK in November of 91, and in Ireland in January of 92. Grossed $83.5 million internationally on a budget of $24 million, and kind of made Kathryn Bigelow a kind of a big star director, as part of a Bigelow Cameron kind of power duo at the time. This was obviously the same year that Terminator 2 was released. Okay, so in Point Break, I've always said Point Break, but I think the actual correct inflection is Point Break. In the film, I think they say Point Break, don't they?
Yeah, like you, I would inflect it like Point Break.
Yeah. I'm going to keep saying Point Break, because I've been saying that for like 30 years. Hotshot rookie FBI agent Johnny Utah, played by Keanu Reeves, goes undercover to infiltrate a tight-knit group of surfers who his partner Angelo Pappas, played by Gary Busey, suspects spend their off-season robbing banks, as the gang dubbed the ex-presidents. Things become complicated when Utah develops an affinity for the lifestyle, forms a close bond with the gang's leader Bodie, played by Patrick Swayze, and falls in love with Tyler, a friend and ex of Bodie's, played by Laurie Petty. I watched this film last night for the 20th or 30th time, probably. Like, wow, this is a movie that I grew up with.
Did it make you want to be a surfer?
No, I've never surfed.
Did it make you want to be a skydiver?
I've never skydived, but I would love to. I think surfing looks impossible. I don't know how they stand up on the boards. It looks impossible. It looks like it shouldn't be possible.
I don't know how like they catch up with each other when they skydive. Like how does that happen? Like, how come some people like fall faster than others when you're skydiving?
Well, yeah, you could slow yourself with wind resistance by stretching your arms out and go faster. Like they all are falling at the same speed, but that would only be in a vacuum. But I was going to say, when we talked about Beetlejuice a few episodes ago, you said that it wasn't a movie that you'd seen many times over the years, but it was a movie, probably Home Alone 2. You mentioned that on that episode as well. Home Alone 2 is a movie that you've seen so many times, and it's just like part of you. And it's very hard to adopt a position of critical distance. And I can't with this movie. I just can't. Last night I took notes for the first like 5 minutes, and then nothing. You know, I just got sucked into it because I think this is one of the best action films ever made.
Really?
Yes, I think it's it's in the conversation for like the best action film of the 90s. I love this movie. So tell me, what did you think? You watched it for the first time?
Yeah, watching it for the first time, right? And it's always been one of... In fact, it's probably the film that has prompted the most sort of gasps when I tell people I've never seen it. You've never seen Point Break? And I say, actually, it's Point Break. And they say, Point Break? And I say, no, it's Point Break. So having finally... so I was excited about it. It's Bigelow's first film that runs longer than 2 hours, right? And after this... She's only made one film since then, which is less than 2 hours. It's like that. It's the 2 hours is that dreaded threshold that as soon as a filmmaker goes beyond, they never quite return. And make
I think on DVD it runs. On DVD it runs less than 2 hours. It's 117 minutes.
But that's a frame rate issue, though, isn't it?
Yeah. You saw it on 35, did you?
I saw it on 35mm projected in my attic. No. I was slightly disappointed by it. I think, and I mentioned the length because I just think it's too long for what is essentially very, very like openly silly material.
Totally disagree.
Keanu Reeves veers very often into a bodacious Bill and Ted mode. I think he's kind of fatally flat here, his performance. And because of its cult status and its position within the, the action canon, a lot of people forgive it for that. A lot of people even embrace it and champion the film because of that. I think Swayze is, I much prefer Swayze in other films. But yeah, I didn't dislike it. I suppose I liked it with qualifications, and my qualifications are, I feel like Johnny's never really established as somebody, like a character who is in need of a purpose or a community to fit into. So, the speed or extent to which he falls in love with the surfing community doesn't really make sense to me. As somebody who wants to join the FBI. I don't think Bodie, as played by Swayze, is particularly charming or mysterious enough to strengthen Johnny's, connection to that community. I don't think Tyler's given enough airtime or screen time. Sorry. But that's just a personal, thing. And like Johnny's affinities and like his dilemmas about, is he on the side of the service, or is he going to, jail them or whatever? They it never really quite makes sense, like dramatically or tonally to me. However, there are wonderful sequences in it, like the action scenes taking them in themselves are pretty great. There's a particular shootout. Is it when Tom Sizemore shows up as the undercover DEA crystal meth guy? I think that shootout in that house is pretty great.
Yeah, so initially when he doesn't, I said in the thing he goes undercover to infiltrate a tight-knit group of surfers.
Yeah.
Initially, it's more general than that. It's trying to locate a tight-knit group. Angelo says these guys are a tight-knit group. There'll be a group within the group.
That's right, and first Bodie's like his point of access. Bodie and Tyler, right?
Bodie
Even
and
though
Tyler.
it's obvious to us that Bodie's going to be the one who's wearing the
Yeah, of course, yeah. But he initially encounters this other tight-knit group who are much more aggressive, and it's funny, the tagline rather for Point Break, or one of the taglines was they only live to get radical, right?
Yeah.
Which is actually something that Bodie says about the other group. He says that they have no spiritual connection to surfing. They only live to get radical, and that's why they'll never understand it. But it turns out that they are like drug dealers, and like one of them is played by the lead singer from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Yeah. Anyway, that's the group that they initially think must be the ex-presidents, and they're called the ex-presidents because they dress up as it's the four most recent ex-presidents at that point, isn't it? It's Reagan, Carter, LBJ, and Nixon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So, as he said, there's a raid on their house, and they like what Keanu Reeves says is they just pulled out an arsenal, and they just like have all these like automatic weapons, and it's fantastic. There are so many great action scenes in this. The foot chase between Johnny and Bodie after the heist contains one really, really funny moment where they're like crashing through people's houses and like vaulting over their fences and breaking windows and kicking down doors and like just like going straight through everything in their path. And then Bodie runs into the house and closes and locks the screen door, and Johnny's right behind him, and he picks up something off the porch and just smashes the window and then falls over the table in the kitchen. So Bodie has this like lead on him.
Yeah. But
when he comes out the other side of the house, Bodie is standing there holding a dog. And he throws the dog at Johnny.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really funny.
A sequence initiated by Johnny buying a hot dog in a kiosk outside of the bank when the car pulls up behind him.
Two meatball sandwiches for Angelo, because Angelo says it's time for lunch at 10:30 in the morning, and he goes and gets hey, like, Utah, get me two. Yeah. And there's a great kind of like pull focus that shows the car pulling up behind outside the bank, and like they're missing the heist. They've been sitting there all morning waiting for it. Both of the skydiving sequences and like the moment you said that Keanu Reeves is flat in this, and like Keanu Reeves, like, he's one of those actors, isn't he? We kind of talked about, like, we kind of mentioned a few of them when we talked about Sean Connery in what's the name of that film that we did?
The Offense.
The Offense, yeah. Where I said that I had no idea that he was capable of acting like that, because I always thought of Sean Connery as like a Clint Eastwood or an Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I could have said or a Keanu Reeves, somebody who just is like a movie star with a very particular demeanor and like screen presence, and like Keanu Reeves has been in, like, I mean, like I said, this is one of my favorite action films of the 90s, but like so is Speed, and at the time so was The Matrix, but he's limited in his range, but when he's doing certain things, he's very, very good.
Goosebumps.
The moment where Bodhi refuses to, so at the end of the film, once everything has kind of fallen apart in the ex-president's lives, and like after they've discovered that that Johnny is actually an FBI agent in the clip that we just listened to. Bodhi gets one of his friends who's not actually part of the gang, his name's Rosie, to kidnap Tyler and tells him that if he doesn't hear from him within a certain amount of time or whatever, to kill Tyler.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know whether he actually told him to do that or not.
Yeah.
I suspect that he didn't. I wouldn't have thought so. Bodhi wouldn't do that.
I don't know. As you said, you don't have no critical distance from this material, so.
I don't. But the scene anyway, they take Johnny up in the plane, and they jump out with their parachutes to meet Rosie on the ground. And Johnny's saying, like, please call it in. Like, what if your parachute fails, and he refuses to, and he jumps out, but he leaves his gun behind, and Johnny's left in the plane with no parachute, but with a gun, and he just starts, like, kicking the walls, and, like, just, like, this impotent, like, panic and rage, and then he just picks up the gun and, like, psychs himself out, and then throws himself out the door of the plane with no parachute. That is such a moment. It's so great. And then he catches up with Bodhi and, like, grabs onto him, puts the gun to his head. Oh, it's so good. How do you not like this film?
It's weird because I was watching feature-length films, not just shorts, last week when I was gallivanting around Europe. But at the festival I was at, Carlo Vivari has a midnight screenings section, right? So I watched for the first time Big Trouble in Little China, like an equally bonkers kind of silly, daft film, right?
It's a lot more bonkers.
But it clocks in much, way under 2 hours. But my point being, if I was to watch Point Break, in a midnight slot at a film festival with a highly audibly appreciative audience on 35mm, of course, then perhaps I would be, pulled along by it. Which is, I think, where good quality torrents come in, because if you watch anything less than what is meant to be the format in which it's meant to be seen, then you're gonna have trouble. But I don't know. It's like Keanu Reeves. I mean, have you seen John Wick?
Yeah.
What's he like in John Wick?
He's good. He's doing what he's good at in John Wick.
Right. But like,
didn't particularly care for the second one, but I think John Wick is okay. Yeah. Okay. So, well, all right. I mean, we mentioned in the introduction that Bigelow was, saw The Wild Bunch, and what was the other film?
Mean Streets.
Mean Streets. Okay, yeah. So that's another one, because I would say Mean Streets.
Mean Streets. Mean Streets.
Yeah,
it's Mean Streets. Mean Streets. Yeah, the streets are mean.
Mean Streets. Oh yeah, okay, whatever. Anyway, the films, impacted her and showed that there was a more sort of, what she says, muscular approach to this kind of filmmaking, and that's really evident here. Like, everything is so visceral and like bruising. Everything, like, all, like, even the squibs that they use for the gunshot wounds are so, like, gruesome and over the top.
Utah's backstory is that he used to be a footballer, promising footballer, NFL footballer, of course, not a soccer player. And he did his knee in, which comes into play later on in the great foot chase that you mentioned, because the reason why Bodhi is able to run off in the end. We don't actually know at that point, by the way. It hasn't been confirmed that that's Bodhi, but obviously it is, because they have that close up of his eyes behind the Regan mask, looking back at Johnny, because he falls, right? Eyes. Johnny falls on the LA River, on the dry bed of the LA River, and again fucks his knee. Has a moment where you think, oh, is he going to shoot? Is he going to shoot Bodhi? Is he going to? And then Bodhi, like, kind of stares him out. And looks back, I guess, with something resembling concern as well for his new buddy, we could argue. And then he doesn't shoot him, and then he shoots everything into the air, like he shoots off a whole round of his gun, like, It's very, very homoerotic. This movie.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously that moment was referenced and lovingly parodied in Hot Fuzz.
You see.
Have you ever shot your gun up in the? Have you ever shot your gun up in the air and gone ah? No, I have never shot my gun up in the air and gone ah. So you've got that. We should also say that, like, you hadn't seen Point Break before, but you had seen the unofficial remake of Point Break, being The Fast and the Furious, which takes the exact plot structure here and just reskins it and just pulls out surfing and puts in street racing.
Yeah.
You know, it Removes the spiritual stuff and puts in a family theme as well.
Yeah, that's right.
With Dom, but you know, I mean, like in popular culture and in film history and film studies, the Magnificent Seven is kind of like routinely referred to as a remake of the Seven Samurai, and if that's a remake of the Seven Samurai, then the Fast and the Furious has to be considered a remake of Point Break. You know, it's Point Break with street racing.
Have you seen the actual remake of Point Break?
No, I couldn't subject myself to it.
Ray Winston.
Is he in it?
Yeah, he's in it. I don't recall who he plays. I haven't seen it, but
Edgar Ramirez plays Bodhi in it, and Edgar Ramirez is in Zero Dark 30, isn't he? I think so. Anyway, one joke that I picked up on this time that I had never got before, which is a little in-joke, is when after they've done the raid on the group of drug dealers and realize that those are not their guys, when Johnny realizes that actually it's Bodhi and his crew, he starts to tail Bodhi, and then he's reporting Bodhi's daily activities to Angelo, and he says he goes to Tower Records, he buys some CDs, he has lunch at Patrick's Roadhouse. Right, this was shot in 1990, so Patrick Swayze's most recent film had been Roadhouse, his second best film after Point Break. So I never got that little joke before.
I'm a Dirty Dancing man, by the way.
I've never seen that.
Speaking of man, some early shots here on the Hill Road, LA streets. The Hilltop LA roads. Are very, very Michael Mann-esque, like with the bouquet behind both Busey and Reeves, and the way in which the city's framed, and the way in which it's an LA film without being like postcard LA, which I really like. Even when the dry river bed of the river shows up, it's very, I don't know, it's a very sort of run down LA that we're seeing, which ultimately I like. But it's 122 minutes long, man. I mean,
122 minutes of,
and it's
incomparable entertainment.
It's 70 minutes. It's on the 70-minute mark or roundabouts there, where Bodhi is confirmed as the ex-president leader. And you've got another 50 minutes of Utah.
Great action scenes.
Wondering what he's going.
Wonderful imagery.
Yeah, I mean, I must say the second skydiving sequence, the climactic one is really, really beautiful. But I felt
as is the final sequence in Australia.
Yeah.
At the 50-year storm.
Yeah.
And I love that Bodhi's like in the clip. You said Bodhi's not charismatic enough. I think he is really charismatic in it. I love when he intervenes when the gang attacks Johnny for the first time.
Yeah, the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Johnny's trying to beat them up, right? And Bodhi comes in, and one of the guys is named War Child.
Yeah, that's right.
Back off, War Child, seriously. That sequence, and then which is kind of how they sort of first really bond. But the clip that we heard is him giving his speech about, like, after they've discovered that Johnny is an FBI agent, and he's talking about, like, this was never about the money for us. This was about sending a message to all those dead souls inching along the freeway in their metal coffins. We keep the spirit of freedom alive.
Yeah.
And he has this theory that every 50 years the ocean shows us how small and insignificant we are, and that this storm comes up from Antarctica, and his theory is proven correct.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's this,
Yeah.
there's this underlying kind of allegory to it as well that is, like, as I say, I've never surfed, but the imagery of, like, the kid who sells him his surfboard, I think, near the beginning, sells Johnny his surfboard, says, a lot of guys your age are learning to surf. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, I'm 25. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. Surfing's the source, man. It'll change your life. Just stick with it. And the imagery of, like, the riding the tubes, and, like, it's so beautifully shot. And the storm at the end is great. Like, and you actually see Bodhi's death in the storm. His kind of, would you call it a suicide? I don't know. His kind of transcendent sort of, meeting his destiny, sort of. Anyway, what would you give this out of 10?
I'm giving it a 6 out of 10.
Holy shit. So it's a 10 out of 10 for me.
Fuck.
It's in my top 100 of all time.
Wow.
I can't believe you've only given it a 6. I've gotten a taste of my own medicine, and it is bitter.
Yeah. How does it feel, eh? No, I mean, again, like, I see, and I've listed the strengths, and, on a scene-to-scene level, I found my interest fluctuating, but when it did grip me, it gripped me. When it didn't, I was like, meh, whatever. Whatever happened to Laurie Petty?
Dunno.
I mean, when she's first introduced, and those bare shoulders and those eyes and that short black hair, I was like, ooh, hello. But yeah, she's not really been in anything else of note, that is, at least anything I've seen.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway.
Oh, she's in Orange is the New Black.
Haven't seen it. I don't watch television.
She's like seems to be one of the major characters in that. Alright, shall we move on?
Yes.
Okay, so as usual on Journeymen episodes, I'm going to relay some of the projects that the director was attached to in between making the films that they ultimately made. So, as I said in the intro to this segment, Point Break was a huge hit, and opened up a lot of doors for Bigelow. And in 1992, she was developing what was described in Variety as her passion project, a film called Company of Angels, which was about Joan of Arc. And in 92, it was set to star Winona Ryder as Joan of Arc. And Variety says, Winona Ryder is now attached to star as Joan of Arc, rather than hairless Irish pop star Sinead O'Connor. Right?
Wow.
So presumably Sinead O'Connor was attached at some point previous. But Warner Brothers was ultimately skeptical about the price tag attached to the movie. It was going to be this expensive period piece. It was going to be shot in Spain in 93 and ultimately produced by James Cameron. That didn't happen, and her next film ended up being 1995's Strange Days.
There's more to this whole thing than you think, Mace.
What do you mean?
All I'm saying is, you don't know how high up the food chain this thing goes. I heard stuff.
What stuff?
I heard stuff. Smoke, rumors. I've heard stuff. I've heard stuff about a death squad. A group of guys, cops, loyal to the hardline school. Guys have had too many years at City Hall, and review boards, and the goddamn media pissing down their necks, suspending cops right and left, tying their hands, while out of the other side of their mouths, these same people are squealing, save us, do something, you fucking morons, crime is totally out of control.
Bullshit, Max. It's conspiracy paranoia.
The issue isn't whether you're paranoid, Lenny. I mean, look at this shit. The issue is whether you're paranoid enough.
Christ.
Exactly. Get religion, man. I love you like my own blood, Lenny, but don't walk near me in public right now, all right?
The only card we gotta play is the tape. Get it to the media.
That's right, yeah, blow it open.
Hey, Mace, Lenny, no disrespect, but you run that on the 11 o'clock news by midnight, you got the biggest riot in history. They'll see the fucking smoke in Canada.
So what the hell are you saying, Max? Pretend it didn't happen?
I say that.
It happened. The LAPD executed one of the most important black men in America. Who the fuck are you to try to bury it?
Fine. You want blood running waist deep in the storm drains, then go do it. 200,000 gangbangers will spread like a wave through this city and burn it to the fucking ground, Mace. And as soon as the fire starts, the street cops will start capping off at anything that moves. It'll be an all-out war, and you know it.
Well, maybe it's time for a war.
Well, you really want that on your head, Mace? Huh? Really?
Okay, so Strange Days runs at an epic 145 minutes, written by James Cameron and Jay Cox, based on a story by the former, produced by James Cameron and Steve Charles Jaffe, the latter formerly of Near Dark, distributed by 20th Century Fox and Universal, released October 1995. Its budget, get this, its budget was $42 million, and its box office gross was $8 million.
Is that domestic?
Yeah, that was in North American. But yeah, I mean, little over a sixth of its budget.
Terrible.
Takes place over the final 2 days of 1999, and actually, my synopsis here, I'm going to quote verbatim from an essay that I wrote for Movie Notebook earlier this year when I watched the film by coincidence. Well, coincidence in relation to the fact that we're doing an episode on Bigelow. Follows Lenny Nero, played by Ralph Fiennes, an ex-LAPD cop who is now a black market trader of playback discs for a superconducting quantum interfering device, otherwise known as a SQUID, which allows users to experience virtual realities and recorded memories, and to relive recorded memories, sorry. It's not like TV, only better, says Lenny. It's life pure and uncut, straight from the cerebral vortex. He should know because he satisfies his own desire for former girlfriend Faith, played by Juliette Lewis, by channeling into his own supply of playback discs and reliving moments spent with her in a happier and sunnier past. Faith, we learn, is now partnered with Philo Gant, played by Michael Wincott, the type of dodgy music producer who sits around in underpants and an ungirdled robe. Lenny, a Teflon goofball romantic and ex-cop who fears for Faith's life when he's drawn into a murder mystery in the most horrific way imaginable, solicits the help of pals Mace, played by Angela Bassett, and who's a chauffeur trained in martial arts, and Max, played by Tom Sizemore, by this point a Bigelow regular, who is an employee of Gant, and Lenny acquires their help to rescue Faith, his old flame. So I didn't rewatch this in the run up to this episode. A lot of its imagery has stayed with me. It's a film. I mean, we're a long way now forward from the Loveless, but this film teems and is packed with ideas that are, historically and socially of their time. I guess in a way that the Loveless wasn't. You hadn't seen it before, had you?
No, I hadn't, and the first thing I wrote before I started watching it was, why have I never seen it? And because I've been aware of it for a long time. I've been aware of it as something that, James Cameron was involved in.
Yeah.
This is the film that Kathryn Bigelow made after Point Break. Sci-fi film. Probably just the running time is the reason that I've never actually sat down and watched it. I mean, you said Point Break was too long. This is so long. I mean, I really didn't like this at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow! The way you were framing or formulating your introduction there, I thought, oh, here we go, Bobby.
No, I thought to myself, wow, okay, so I've never seen it, and I made the right choice. Yeah, no, I don't think this works at all. And when you read about the development of the concept, it originated as a James Cameron concept that was basically a sci-fi romance, right? And then the LA riots and the Rodney King, also all that stuff happened in the early 90s. And Bigelow, on an early episode, I cut it from the Near Dark segment that we just played, but on the Halloween episode of the full Near Dark segment where we had a little bit of general Bigelow discussion, you asked me if I would like her to go back to doing that kind of pulpy genre material, characterized by that great 3-film run of Near Dark, Blue Steel, Point Break.
Yeah.
Rather than, I think what you said, you described as pseudo-political thrillers.
Yes.
But this is really her first political film.
Yeah.
This is very political.
I'd say Blue Steel is also, but I know what you mean.
Well, Blue Steel doesn't have a political element to it. I mean, it's in the very general sense of like gender politics or whatever. But I mean like politics, like actual like institutional politics and things like this is a direct response to a particular political event. This is
it's very conscious. It's very consciously
actually
redeveloped or developed in the wake of the 1992 Rodney King beating, right?
Yes, very consciously, and I would say very ineptly rewritten so that it has these two things that have literally nothing to do with each other going on in the film. So you've got basically four plot elements. You've got the VR, let's say you call it squid, right? The squid technology.
Squid, yeah.
You've got the like lovelorn protagonist obsessing over this, lost love. You've got the police murder of the
rapper.
Of the rapper, yeah. What's his name? Jericho 1. Jericho 1, yeah. And he's more than a rapper. He's like he's becoming this civil rights kind of major civil rights kind of leader for African Americans. And on top of that, you've got this this like sleazy record exec thing with like, but there's no connection between the two concepts. Like, so what you have is it's basically the plot as it's revealed, because it's structured as a mystery. So the plot as it's revealed to us toward the end of the film is that the record executive is becoming paranoid that his prize artist is going to like leave his label or whatever. So he starts to spy on him. So he has this girl wear one of these squid devices, which people wear, like it's like a kind of like almost like a hairnet that they wear underneath a wig, and it records their experiences. And anyway, he gets pulled over by the LAPD, and he kind of antagonizes them, and they respond by killing him, executing him, and that's all recorded. And then they start killing everybody in the car, and the girl escapes, and she is friends with Ralph Fiennes' character.
Yeah, Lenny,
and what's his surname?
Nero,
yeah, Lenny Nero. So she's friends with Lenny. She shows up at the club, and she drops. What's really funny is the film is an early like promoter of mini disc technology.
Yeah,
which like I remember a friend of mine in school, like in, I don't know, I guess it was like maybe the early 2000s, when minidisc was waging a war with MP3, buying a minidisc player, and I was kind of talking to him about like, do you think I should get a minidisc or an MP3 player? And he was like, man, minidisc is the future. Anyway, so that's basically the premise, but as the film wears on, the recorded information on the squid device on the minidisc, it may as well not be a VR experience. It may as well just be an incriminating videotape, right? There's no connection. There's no, like, it's so clearly just like two completely different ideas just smushed together.
This is a paragraph from that essay that I wrote earlier this year, right? Again, I'll quote verbatim. The same technology that permits the real-time consumption of a snuff movie of, that is, straight-up actual murder, might also have value as a means of immortalizing an incident in which two white cops, or four, or whatever, shoot or beat, stomp, kick, truncheon, etc., two unarmed black men, or one, and holding the assailants to account. So yeah, I know what you mean. So this technology is introduced to us, firstly, as a means by which we can actually sensorially, experientially live these memories. Yeah. And then as it's used later in the film as evidence against to incriminate cops,
it may as well just be a videotape.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the other problem with the technology is that it's never really either clearly defined or satisfyingly and interestingly elaborated, with one exception. First of all, in terms of the definition of the technology, initially I was asking myself, okay, are they only seeing what is recorded, or are they actually experiencing it? And we're told they're actually fully experiencing it again.
Yeah.
But in that case, how do they, like, they're able to operate a remote control at the same time. Now, if they're actually living in the prior experience and it's a full body experience, how are they operating their body in such a way that they're not in the memory? Like, he's able to get up and walk around. He's able to respond to people who are talking to him, like in the car, while he's having this other experience. But he says, when he gives it to Mace later on, who's kind of wary of the technology and doesn't, what do they call them? Something heads, wireheads. People who are kind of addicted to reliving these memories. He says, keep your eyes closed or you'll see double. So are they having these weird kind of like double experiences? That's not explored at all. The only time it's really moves in the direction of being something kind of interesting as a sci-fi concept, as opposed to just like being a basic sort of VR concept, is when the women are raped and murdered and the killer puts a squid device on their head, wears one himself, and feeds it into their device. So we're told they are effectively experiencing raping themselves.
So I've got a quotation. Another quotation. The opening of this essay is a blindfold of that I wrote, by the way. A blindfolded woman experiences her own rape and murder through the eyes and senses of the man raping and murdering her. The act done, the life gone from her, the blindfold is removed, her eyes dark black in the unlit room. We see the masked perpetrator. It's an image of an image displaced, for we are watching this heinous monstrosity unfold as a point-of-view shot, our viewing experience shared by a helpless on-screen witness located at a remove from the action. The crime is suffered first and second and third hand thanks to Squid, attached to three people's heads. Killer voyeur, victim voyeur, witness voyeur, and then us, a kind of fatal four-way whose complexities are rooted to and deepened by our own participation as viewers.
Wait, who is the witness there?
Like us. And the voyeur, the victim voyeur, and then witness voyeur.
Yeah, but who's the witness, though?
The victim. Because she is reliving it from his point of view as it's happening.
Ah, sorry, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah. So, like, Lenny in the car is the witness.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, okay. Yeah, sure, okay, so there's a kind of a possibility of exploring it as a kind of novel time travel premise, but it just doesn't go anywhere. Like, there's those two scenes, and then it's like, well, okay, it's just a recording of data, and it's incriminating to these people, and they're trying to get it and destroy it. And yeah, I mean, like, they set up the double vision thing, and then they don't even show it to us. Like, why introduce that concept and then not build, like, you would think you're going to build a kind of like almost like De Palma-esque, like, set piece around this, where we're getting this weird double vision or something like that. Nothing. And it almost seems like, because it was written and produced by James Cameron, and it feels as though that's what he was interested in, was this, like, lost love, exploring these, like, people obsessed with reliving their memories. But Bigelow was interested in this racial, like, sci-fi race allegory thing.
Well, I know that she went on record saying that she participated in the cleanup after the LA riots, after Rodney King. It wasn't just after the beating, was it? The riots, they were prompted by the fact that the police were acquitted.
Yeah.
And she participated in the cleanup act, and so I think felt that experience, I think, informed her reading of what the script was and what should be emphasized and expanded within it. And I think you're right. I think Cameron's own reading of Jay Cox's script based on his story was that it was very much this kind of sci-fi romance. I like that concept, and I don't see why the two can't coexist.
They could coexist if they were connected to each other.
For me, what my biggest flaw with this is I think Ralph Fiennes is fatally miscast.
I was going to say Ralph Fiennes is horribly miscast in this role. You don't buy him at all as this kind of, like, he's an ex-cop who's supposed to be now involved in this, like, disreputable, almost, like, sleazy underground distribution of, and he has his ethics. He's like, I don't deal in snuff and all this kind of thing.
Yeah, but, like, he's referred to in film as a guy who could sell a goddamn rat's asshole for a wedding ring. But I've always felt like Fiennes was much better at being intense than pathetic. Like, I just don't buy him at all in this role.
I also don't like...
Angela Bassett's great, I think.
Angela Bassett is good. And Tom Sizemore is good. I don't like... why am I forgetting her name?
Juliette Lewis.
Yeah. But I don't particularly like Juliette Lewis anyway.
Mm.
I find her kind of annoying, and the way that she's portrayed, like in this kind of like hyper-sexed way in this.
Yeah.
The film I know her best from is Cape Fear.
Yeah.
And her sexuality is portrayed very differently in that, where she's kind of manipulated by Max Cady, by Robert De Niro, and she's kind of naive, and this is like exploratory kind of thing. I don't know, maybe it's that I can't shake that association, but I don't know, didn't buy the relationship between her and Fiennes at all, and you can't like hinge everything on that one memory tape, the squid tape that he has, that he just lives again. You know, she's kind of just horrible to him all the way through. But also then, so the revelation is that the rapist murderer, which is kind of one of two plots, the other plot being the two cops who are chasing the girl who, has the recording. And like, the inciting incident of this movie happens about 50 minutes in, right? Because the inciting incident being Lenny seeing the tape.
Yeah.
Right? But like, instead of getting the tape to Lenny, she puts it in the sunroof of his car, and I thought, okay. And at that point, I was kind of still on board. I was like, okay, I should also say that I'm not usually a fan of cyberpunk. I don't generally like the milieu. I don't generally like the characters who populate these stories.
Yeah.
I don't generally like the, like kind of techno-libertarian kind of sensibility that underpins them. And they always have this like near future setting that dates horribly. And so that might be another reason that I never saw the movie before, but the plot is just weird. Like, she puts the thing into the sunroof of his car and then goes in and says, "Oh, I gotta talk to you, come out to your car," or something like that. And then his car gets towed, and it's this like weird circuitous route to like them eventually going, "Hey, she said something about my car," like 45 minutes later. We better go to the impound lot and check the car. Why? Why is the inciting... Like, you don't put your inciting incident nearly halfway through your movie and just, like, pad out the first 45 minutes with this world building. And that's the reason I said I'm not into cyberpunk stuff, is because it just, like... I was bored out of my mind for long stretches of this movie. And the plot never really comes together. And when those two cops turn up again at the end, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about those guys.
Yeah.
Because we've just spent, and then, as I said, Tom Sizemore in a hilarious blonde wig. He turns out to be the rapist murderer who's acting on the orders of the record exec guy, right?
Fido Gant.
Yeah. So they have a big fight at the end, Lenny and Tom Sizemore. Max, sorry. And it's right on as the ball is dropping on the New Year's Eve celebrations and everything, and in Times Square, and I'm sorry, not Times Square, they're in LA. Lenny throws him over the balcony, and he grabs onto him and he says, "I'm taking you with me, you motherfucker." And like, wait, but there's been no like, hostility between them. There's no like bad blood necessarily. It's he did what he did because he fell in love with Faith.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the way he expresses it is he kind of feels kind of guilty about it and conflicted about it.
Yeah.
And Max or Lenny says, it just so happened that I was your best friend, and he's like, he doesn't contradict him or anything. And it seems like this unfortunate set of circumstances that have driven them to, it just doesn't have any, I don't know, that line just felt weird to me.
I know what you mean when you said he's never really tend to age very well. I mean, I called it a very 90s film. It's excessive and it's peculiar. It's confrontational, but very flippant about its confrontations. And it's sort of deeply serious in a very trashy kind of way. Like, the two cops getting the sour ending with the cops. I mean, like, they get let off lightly, really, in a way. But this whole pretense that I think it's naive, the film, to presume that, the world would fucking care anyway.
Yeah. All right. Will we wrap it up there?
7 for me.
3 for me.
3. Wow. I mean,
3. Yeah.
I'm giving it 7 on the strength of.
That's not a revenge rating for Point Break, by the way. I'm not changing my ratings. No, I disliked it. I was bored and irritated by the way that it lurches from storyline to storyline, and also then the time, the exorbitant time spent doing all of this world building that doesn't really amount to anything. You know, I mean, if you're gonna like even the premise of like, oh, there's this subculture of people who are just living in their memories, it's not explored at all. You know, it's just not. Like, it's set up as like a dealer, this contact that he has, and you know, you don't get anything. It's not elaborated. It doesn't satisfy as science fiction. So unless you're really into the cyberpunk milieu thing.
I love cyberpunk.
Yeah, I know.
I'm famous for it. I'm famous for it. So I think time will tell very, very soon. But I think, I don't know, is this the start of a rocky period?
Sure. It's certainly the first film of hers that I would say I disliked.
Okay, so that was part 1 of 2 episodes on Kathryn Bigelow. My name is Michael Pattison. I've been here with my co-host,
Bobby Lowe.
Follow us on Twitter at _Journeymen and subscribe to us through SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, and YouTube. Thanks.
Thank you.